This week and next week, you're going to be doing orthographic sketching, and we're going to, I think it's 3 sketches a week, might be 4 sketches in some weeks. But we're going to start out, some of you will already know how to do this, some of you may not, maybe your first drafting class. So I'm going to walk you through how to do an orthographic sketch. And we're going to be doing this, the third angle, because that's what we do here in the United States. As you've read in this chapter, first angle is a metric method of projection. Third angle is what we use here in America. Anyway, what we're going to do, we're going to take this object right here, and we have an isometric view, the front, the top, and the right side. And we're going to draw it out flat, just like the example on the previous page there. This one, number 1 and number 2, we'll do at a 1-to-1 scale, meaning 1 dot in the isometric is 1 dot either here or in your graph, on your graph paper. The third one, we're going to do it at a 2-to-1 scale, because if you notice, the dots are further apart in the isometric. So we'll take 1 set of dots here and make it 2 sets of dots in our sketch. Okay, and Blackboard will tell you about that. So let me zoom down on this. The way to tell your sizes is you count these dots. So if you can project straight down, or just count them across. And so my length is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 dots long. So my length is 10 dots. Now when I draw that on my graph paper, the space of 1 dot is going to be 1/4 of an inch, is what we're going to use. So let me zoom back out. Here's what your finished product will look like. And we have our top view, our front view, and our right side view. And we're drawing center marks for circles, hidden lines for anything that's not visible, and then a center line that shows the axes of the hole going through there. And I would prefer that you draw these sketches freehand without using a straight edge. Some of the ones later on, you have to use a straight edge. But for these, I would rather you do them freehand so that you kind of get some experience with that and some practice doing that. And then when you're done with it, erase out construction lines, any boo-boos, things like that. Darken in your object lines so they're nice and dark. And then put the class, the exercise number, and your name down in the corner like a title block. All right, now where do I start? How do I center this thing up? It's a real simple mathematical formula to figure out where to start. You take your length of your paper, which in this case is 11 inches, okay, or 44 squares, 4 squares to an inch, and you subtract from that the length of your object and the depth of your object, and then you divide by 3, and that gives you the 3 spaces. So in this case, I have 44 squares long. I want to subtract the length, which is 10 squares, gives me 34. I want to subtract the depth of the object, which is 7 squares. That gives me 27. I divide that by 3, that'll go 9 times. Okay? So I used, in this case, with this paper, I would use 9 squares between views. So I count over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 squares. And I'll put me a little mark right there. Okay. Height-wise, excuse me, it's 8.5 inches, my sheet is. So it gives me 34 squares. I subtract from that the height of my object, of the front view, which is 6. Gives me 28. I subtract from that again the depth, which is 7, and that gives me 21. I divide that by 3. That gives me what, 7 squares? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And so I would count up 7 squares, and that would be my starting point. Now, the only paper I have here to draw with is left over from my contracting days when I had some from the Tom Barrow Company. They got, picked up somewhere. It's okay to use, something like this. That's fine. You can use the full sheet grid. That's fine. Center it up as best you can so that it looks neat and balanced. So in my case, most of the time I start on the left side for the front view and I start drawing there. I'm going to do my layout from the right side and come back. So I'm going to come over 7 squares. I'm going to count the one there as a 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Put me a little mark there. And then my depth was 7 squares. Wait a minute. That wasn't 7. That was 9. My boo-boo. It's 7 up. And then go 9 squares, 7 squares. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Another 9. And then my length of 10. Okay, so I'm just making little marks across the bottom. This gives me where my front view is going to go here, and my side view is going to go right here. Now I'll go up, and I'll count up the 7 squares between views. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The height of my object is 6 squares. 7 squares for my space. And then the depth of my object is 7 squares. Okay, so now I know where my front view, where my views are going to be. So my front view is going to start right here. And since I'm sketching, I can just go ahead and kind of start drawing it. It's simple enough. It's 6 squares tall. And I'm going to draw these lightly to start with. And then I'll come and darken them in once I'm done. And it's okay to turn your paper if it makes it easier for you to do the sketching. Okay, so I drew in my left side and my bottom side because they're full height and length. Now on the right end it goes up 2 squares, across the top, comes over 6 squares over to right there, and then I connect those 2 points. Okay, and so that gave me the outline of my front view. Now I can go up my top view. It's going to be here, and I can just project from my front view up to see the length of objects. And it's squared off all the way around when you look down on it. Okay, so it gave me that shape. I'm going to come back and do my hole after I get my other views in. And I can come over here to my side view. Okay, so I've got my views roughed in with all my straight lines. Now my hole, my circle, is in the center up here. It's three squares over. So I'm going to put a mark right there. And it's centered going back. So that's 3.5 squares going back. So there's my center of it. And I just kind of pencil in a center line. And I know it has a radius of like 1.5 squares, a diameter of 3 squares. And so let me zoom down on this view for you. I find it easier to freehand sketch circles, if I go ahead and put my marks in for my radius, and then a trick that you can use is, take another piece of paper and lay it down, and I'm not using a ruler, I'm just using a paper. I'm making a measurement, kind of a mark there to mark the radius, and I'll go ahead and mark the diameter. And I just rotate my paper, and I can transfer those diameter marks on the diagonals. Because if I've got these marks, it makes drawing a circle easier. And now I can kind of sketch the arc joining those pieces, those little marks together. And if you've never done very much of this, you could always practice, on another piece of paper first. Okay, and so that got me a circle kind of sketched in. Then let me zoom back out here. And now I would take the size of my circle and project it down into my front view, which if we were doing this in AutoCAD is how we would do that. Okay, so I know it's 1.5 squares over from the edge there, and I know this is going to be a hidden line. So I'm just going to put a mark for it right now. My center line is going to go on here, and that hidden line will go there. And now for the side view, it's kind of the same thing, except for now I'm measuring from this direction, because I'm taking this view and I'm going to bring it over, rotate it, and bring it down. And so we're 2 squares in for the edge of the hole. And of course the hole is 1.5. Another 1.5, and that gives me 2 squares to the end. I've just made my marks on it there. Now I want to darken it. And so I'm going to use a really thick, heavy pencil so it'll show up good here in the video. And when I darken, I want to be a little more careful than when I was laying out the construction lines, so that I get a fairly straight and neat line. And if you notice, I'm not trying to draw the whole thing at one time. I'm taking short strokes with my pencil and then moving my hand down. To me, I find it easier to do it in short segments. As opposed to trying to draw the whole line at one time. Okay, now do my center mark and my center line, and I want to bring that center line out about a 1/4 of an inch outside of the circle. Now I can darken my circle in. Okay, so that's got my top view done. Now I can come on and darken in my other views. And I can add my hidden line, because it's going to be a dash line, and the dashes are about 1/8 of an inch long. And we're not measuring them on the sketches, but they should be about 1/8 of an inch, which would be 1/2 a square. And then I'll put a center line down the axis of the hole. Now, right side view is left. And here, where we've got a hidden line that's crossing an object line, we want to leave a little bit of a gap where it crosses that object line, because this particular hole does not intersect that object line. Now, in our CAD, it won't show up that way. It'll just be a continuous line. But with a hand drawing, it's a nice little extra step to indicate that this hole does not intersect that object line. And then I'll come back and put my center line in. Okay. And then you erase your construction marks, any that you made. Okay, and then put your name, put the class, Drafting 2020, the exercise, which in this case is Chapter 7, Exercise 1, and then your name. Last name is fine. If you got a very common name, first initial, last name. And that's what drawing number 1 looks like. Okay. Drawing number 2 is very similar. Drawing number 3, because you remember I said we're going to do it at a 2:1 scale. This gives you an idea of how that's going to look. And so with it, you'd count 1 square in the book, 1 square in the book, and then you're going to draw 2 squares to get your finished drawing. And then next week, let me look at my notes here. Next week, they're very similar, just a little more complicated shapes, okay? So that should be it. If you've got questions, ask me or the lab assistant.